Uh, Thank you, Irina. Good morning, everyone. Uh, I would like to thank, first of all, Irina and Slovak Academy of Science and Institute for Philosophy for inviting me. Yeah, so my name is Andrei Rodin. Sorry. Yes. My name is Andrei Rodin. I am presently a researcher in Nancy. It's a part of France. We have this University of Lorraine archive Henri Poincaré. Yes, but earlier actually, for many years I worked in the similar institution in Moscow, so I had to leave as many because of the war, which actually I very much oppose. And yes, so I'm happy to be here and give a talk. So I'll talk about automated theorem proving and foundational mathematics. And actually, I'm particularly excited because all last week I spent on Zoom. Unfortunately, I couldn't travel, but in Cambridge, in the Newton Institute, was the whole week of a conference on the topic of automated theorem proving. And by the way, if you might notice, if you compare my title with the poster, there is a slight change. Yes, also there was a mistake with the month, but also a little bit change automated proof verification for theorem proving, because, and that's not, how to say, that was in purpose because until yesterday, I believed only automated proof verification. So I believe that is the only serious thing we can do in that. And all the rest is kind of fantasy. But actually, last week persuaded me that it's no longer the case. We can really talk about automated theorem proving, and we must think what to do without that. And yes, here is my plan. So I would start, as usually philosophers and this humanity people do, with a brief history. But in that part, actually, history will be relatively brief. So I'll start not with Leibniz and other people that I will do for the third part, but people really this proof verification. So it's the beginning of what is called artificial intelligence today. So it's late 50s and 1960s. And then I'll talk a little bit about, say, today. I think I have a really good, after this week in Cambridge, very good understanding what's going on, say, today. But then I'll bring this broader thing about, that's of course the traditional topics, about foundations of mathematics and how the two things are related, which I think it's interesting and important to relate them. That's I'll try to make this argument. And finally, I come to some conclusion. So official history of artificial intelligence starts with this workshop, Dartmouth workshop at 65th, but that's, of course, its convention as many things in history, what we want, like founding events. And if we want to do something similar for automated proof, for automated theorem proving, right? That will be also important meeting in Versailles in 68, where actually first working system of that sort was presented by Nicolas de Bruyn, called Automat. Actually, when I'll talk about these systems, I'll decided only put the date of birth, because the date of death is not obvious. I mean, there is understanding in many cases, kind of shared understanding that systems just went obsolete completely, so they no longer exist, but it's still, there is no official death. And actually that's another interesting project, which by the way, led by some of my colleagues in Archive Henri Poincaré. It's kind of excavate old software, all that stuff, making this kind of archiving history, which is not at all easy and obvious. Right, so so I only talk about everything is born to eternity. We pretend that. But actually, that's not quite true. That's a bit late because here we have a actually paper by John McCarthy. Some people would say the founder of artificial intelligence. At least I think it's he invented the brand, right? And so he published it. It's no, since it's 1961, and he gave this paper, "Computer Programs for Checking Mathematical Proofs." So it's about proof verification. That time, so he says checking mathematical, and this is before this conference, right? It's 61. Uh, uh, checking mathematical proofs is potentially one of the most interesting and useful application of automatic computers. Computers can check not only the proofs of new mathematical theorems, but also proofs that complex engineering system and computer congress meet their specifications. That, by the way, important, because I will not really talk about that, because one obvious application is mathematics, right? This verification, but it's also actually has a lot of industrial application. Just checking all kinds of software actually is based on similar principles. And but here I don't have this expert knowledge, but that's just to understand that it's not an isolated topic in computer science. So continuous McCarthy proofs to be checked by computer may be briefer and easier to write than the informal proof acceptable to mathematicians. This is because the computer can be asked to do much more work to check each step than a human is willing to do. And this permits longer and fewer steps. So roughly, I think we trying to understand the idea, which of course was not new to that something like that, as I say, discussed even back by Leibniz, but I come to that later. So he says the combination, that's important actually, because that really marks all the further development, in particular today. The combination of proof-checking technique on the one hand with proof-finding heuristic or proof search, people say about proof search, will permit mathematicians to try out ideas for proofs that are still quite vague and may speed up mathematical research. So there are this important distinction between these two functions. One thing is to find the proof, and the other thing, somehow ready-made proof to check it, right? And but today we'll see these things are combined. Actually, in the beginning, people kind of dreamed about both things, but for a long period, only proof checking was kind of realistic, you see, and proof search was very, very limited, but that's, I think, it's really changing fast just these years. Yeah, and now it's very arbitrarily history. I'm not doing kind of systematic history, but I would like to pick up someone who worked in Soviet Union and actually in 62, again pretty early, right, was founded a special institute in Kiev, now obviously Ukraine, which is existent today. It's Ukrainian, belongs to Ukrainian National Academy of Science. It changed a lot of names, but I would call like Institute of Cybernetics, and there was a special journal, right? And
can I try to hide the panel?
Sorry? What do you want? Is it okay with YouTube? Ah, to hide the panel. Yeah, it's yeah. Thank you. Yeah, I'm sorry. Yes. So actually, computer program or kind of artificial intelligence program in Soviet Union was basically based in Kiev. And there was also a center in St. Petersburg, which was more theoretical, so kind of constructive mathematics people that which actually better became internationally known, like Grisha Mintz, who later became professor in Berkeley, Stanford, for example, right? But here people were like Glushkov and his team, they really were practically as a computer scientist. And by the way, there is even today, and they did it, by the way, on Soviet machines, which later became obsolete. And so his achievement was kind of translated. There are still some Ukrainian colleagues who are trying to push further. So he writes in, this is year 70, right, in a kind of founding paper, some problems automating theory artificial intelligence. The focus of research on automatization of theorem proving should shift from building universal proving programs. And universal proving programs is kind of thing we think about if we think theoretically, like Turing computations, that kind of stuff, right? We would always ask kind of universal Turing machine, that kind of thing. But when people start to work practically, of course, they have behind these general ideas, right? But then they have to make kind of pragmatic choice, but also kind of new conceptual choice, if you like. And here actually he describes, I don't want to claim priority, perhaps De Bruyn did the same year, but he very well formulated here what later became proof assistant, right? And which is a system which interacts, which involves a human mathematician, a user, and in real time interacts with the user rather than by magic, just, do something, prove theorems or whatever. So he says, so it should shift from building universal proving programs to development of systems of automated programming and operation system, which would allow, if necessary, to quickly program a proof search for the single difficult theorem and able to work in the real time with a mathematician struggling to prove this theorem. Only that strategy, in his opinion, allows us to obtain palpable practical results in the foreseeable future. And we would say the later development up to today rather completely confirms that point of view. So that was the right choice. Interesting historical question is how Glushkov would interact, say, with Americans, McCarthy and all this group and people in France, because they never actually did any reference, right? But apparently they did. I by chance was present at a Zoom talk, and there was very old woman, I can forgot the name unfortunately, who somehow was present there. She was young when she was somehow around McCarthy, and she said, yeah, we knew this Russian, he came and there and back. But still we can say it's all, everything kind of borrowed or stolen. It was just part of this development, just because of this political, unfortunate, of course, for science events, they did not fully acknowledge each other. But otherwise that was quite a parallel and development with a sufficient degree of exchange, I guess. But that's still open historical question to describe it more precisely, what they read exactly, whether anybody on the West read that stuff and so on. Yes, so I come back to this timeline. So we have this mid-50s automat, this first, and Glushkov and the company also develop a system, also very early. Again, I don't want precise dates to avoid priority questions. They called it Система автоматизации доказательств, system for automated proof system, right? He also kind of invented this kind of brand. He called it evidence algorithm, algorithm очевидности, which was rather theoretical concept behind. And by the way, that's interesting to compare what recently became so-called justification logic. There is several years ago was a book published by Sergei Artemov and Mel Fitting on that. But Glushkov was not really a logician, So that was a difference between these communities, say theoretical, highbrow mathematical logicians in St. Petersburg, which were nevertheless interested in applications, and people rather working with computers like him, like Glushkov. Right, then it's not full history, just few points. There was this so-called logic for computable function made in Stanford, if I remember correctly, and later it somehow developed into systems which are still used today eventually, which are called COAL, or was kind of small hole later. It's for high order logic by Michael Gordon, and Isbell, which remains quite popular in '86 by Lawrence Paulson. And then actually in Poland, and still under the communist regime, there was also interesting independent development led by Andrzej Tribulek. They developed what they call Mizar system, which is shared many things with, say, this Glushkov on the other hand. But they did independently. You may use whatever ideas, but if you start to, how say, to do your system, you do your system. So it's not, how say, even question that it's independent, right? You cannot just, how say, stole it or just borrow from elsewhere, in particular at that point of history. Right, but then very important theoretical development happened, which really gave rise to new generation of this proof of system, and that I cannot explain now because it's some theoretical thing. I can explain it on another occasion by Per Martin Löf, a Swedish mathematician and logician, who, by the way, spent several years, I think, working with Kolmogorov in Moscow, but on different, actually, topic, not on that topic. He invented what today is called Martin-Löf type theory, and basically it's type theory with dependent type. So he introduced this notion of dependent type. I'll tell a little bit about type theories later, because this is actually theoretical background of all those systems, right? But that was this new generation of type theories, and correspondingly new generation of proof assistants, which earliest, that was the earliest one in United States. I forgot the university, Nurple. No, it's still somehow there. You can access the code. It's all open by Robert Constable. I think at least recently he was still active. I don't know. I met him some maybe 15 years ago in a conference. Then Thierry Cacan, who is a French mathematician, logician, but working in Sweden in Charles University for many years, and he invented the system Hawk, which is still. Then actually his wife did a bit different system. Hawk is more like a system. Agda is more like a language, but basically it implements the same Martin-Löf type theory, or better say the same fragment of that type, because of course the system just implement fragments. And when I say implement, there is of course a lot of things. It's not like Platonic ideas, materialized. There is a lot of stuff which going with it, right? And there are many other names, but since 2013, actually was released a Lean, which is today by far the most popular proof assistant, and so was originally invented by Leonardo de Mura, who somehow, if I understand correctly, is no longer actually interested in development. Yeah, this is their title, and here, you see, you have a very nice web page, and so it's everybody is welcome, and that's because that belongs to Microsoft, who put some money and did it. A project which, on the one hand, kind of commercial, but also public and open, and nobody else did it. So that's a partial, at least, explanation why Lean is possible. Yeah, how I'm doing this time? So, what do you want to say? I don't know. You didn't say how much time. Tell me. Half? Yes. Okay. Okay, right. So Lean in that sense is exceptional. Just for comparing, this is actually yes, and they're all doing libraries. That's something, okay, I'll tell in a minute, because one thing is just, check certain proof, but the other idea that actually proof assistant would give us the future model for just preserving and transmitting and dissemination of mathematical knowledge. That knowledge should be no longer be stocked in books like that, right? Even today, say, there is this mathematical archive, which is online, but which is still uses more or less traditional texts, right? And but somehow this mathematical knowledge will be preserved and further developed in this form of code. So, but then, of course, you need a library, and what language is used, right? If it's like one language library, that we may also think about like multi-language libraries, but I think at least presently we have a library. So this is a Coq library. You see, there is nothing like that. Even if it's not how say only arbitrary choice who put more money, who made better website, and because there are really principal choices, and that's something that I'll talk in the second part of my talk. I'll try to elaborate. So this is this workshop, a week-long workshop we just finished last Friday. It was the third edition of that kind of workshop. Actually, it's everything on YouTube, so you can actually access it. So I'll try to a little bit summarize. I will not now give a lot of references, but what are like today major motivations? What is the purpose for developing that, right? Perhaps it changes a little bit from 60s. It would be interesting also historically compare, but probably certain things were already there. But as things are now, at least, okay, proof verification, it's probably remains central. And as I'll show you in a minute, is not at all unproblematic, say, epistemologically. But it's not only that. The second point is support of large collaborative projects, is what people call sometimes citizen mathematics, like citizen science. So it allows many people to contribute to formalize something without necessarily having university degree and that kind of thing. Again, I think it's quite controversial, but at least this is what this technology actually makes possible. And we see this happening. And last thing I already mentioned is like stocking, preservation, archiving, dissemination, mathematical knowledge, right? And of course, that is related to education, right? When we talk about libraries, how this should or should not, and in which form, be part of mathematics education on, again, different levels. Yeah, so I think there are these three things. Yeah, and here I borrowed slide from a colleague. Actually, there were, I think, very few philosophers, but was at least one, Fenner Transwell, who is actually working on also math education. And yeah, and he, in his turn, he took this slide from Terence Tao, who is probably the most famous working mathematician. He was also part of that conference, by the way. And Terence is really enthusiastic about this stuff. And so he writes, with proof assistance, you don't need to trust the people you are working with, because the programs gives you this 100% guarantee. Then you can do this for proof verification. And second thing for this collective project, that you can do factory production type industrial scale mathematics. You know, it's like industrialization, kind of Stalin things, which doesn't really exist right now. One person focuses on just proving certain types of results, like a model supply chain. So this is for him a dream. Yeah, I would make some reservations about that, but okay, let's see. And this is another talk also last year. I think in the future, and that's interesting because that is something new, right? That's something that did not exist in time in 60s when Glushkov and other people were working. He says, I think in the future, instead of typing up our programs, we would explain them to some GPT. So it's really now it's big business that mathematicians should not all learn write code. This is not actually, because what actually things like large linguistic model do really do much better than mathematics, by the way, if you are not probably have this experience, they code pretty well. So this idea to have informal proof and ask him to code is, I would say, much works, at least as things are today, much better than verify a proof and to leave alone to find a proof. For that, there are these special systems, but say general ChatGPT just doesn't do that. You may try to ask him to prove Pythagorean theorem and see what kind of, what he gives back. And if on the language other than English, it's even absolutely horrible, obviously. Right. Yeah, so the idea that actually it's you use something like machine learning, and the GPT will try to formalize it in Lean as you go along. And everything checks out. The GPT will say, here is your paper in LaTeX. So it's LaTeX. I don't know, everyone knows. It's just an editorial system all mathematicians use for producing more or less like traditional mathematical text. Here is your Lean proof. If you like, I can press this button and submit you to a journal. It could be wonderful assistance in the future. And actually, that's what Fenner himself, there are different schemes, actually, not everybody agrees with that, but how he imagines that you submit a paper in a journal, and okay, if it's probably garbage, just editor puts it aside, but if not, the editor uses this auto formalization with a large linguistic model. Other people think that it should be the author responsibility to do that, but Fenner thinks just a journal can do that. Then the system is checked with Lean, and then he didn't put it. It's deformalized, right? Because the same kind of artificial intelligence, you can use the other way around, just having code to make it into something human readable, and this is a big business, and then publish somehow having this code behind, so you may check out code, but also describe it in kind of human, attractive and understandable way. Right, but there are many issues. I just, point them very briefly. Of course, there is question, why should we believe Lean? So the idea behind is this, that everything which is technically, people would say type checked, that means that your Lean program just stops somewhere, right? In a reasonable finite time, that means that there is a proof that this is a, computation made with Lean represents kind of logical inference. And this is, of course, idea by default. You should believe that. It's what people also technically call trusted core. Lean, by the way, is written on C++. It kind of implements, again, the same, basically, type theory with dependent types, but as I say, implements actually may have a lot of bugs in it. So you should somehow believe Lean. In a sense, it's very traditional, very, say, foundational, right? If I use set theory as a language, I should be sure that somehow I should believe set theory, at least in the sense that it's consistent or something like this, right? Yes, and but there are also interesting projects. For example, was presented, people developed Lean for Lean, so they try to check Lean with Lean. Then it's not completely actually epistemically clear. If there is something wrong with Lean, so what it would give you check Lean with Lean. But I think the idea is that if you somehow think about Lean as kind of intuitively acceptable and you check Lean with itself, then after all, it gives you more confidence that it's okay. Then actually people don't much, we may immediately as a philosopher think, what about like Gödel second incompleteness theorem and stuff like that, right? But okay, we may ask these questions. I think they're appropriate, but at least it does not stop people to do that kind of work. But then there is actually more issues because Yes. Sorry. Yes. Yeah. Okay. I probably skip a little bit. Uh, so good question, I think, and there's certainly people ask this question, right? What it really gives. Imagine a situation is there are a lot of reasons to do this formal proof verification or automated proof verification now, because now even more than in the 60s, mathematical proofs become kind of unbearable, very long. There is, for example, this ABC conjecture that there are like some thousands of pages of, how to say, attempted proof, and nobody can check it, whether it's really proof. Say with things like Poincare conjecture with Georgi Perelman, there was a consensus reached in a relatively small community, people who are not in a position not just understand some ideas of the proof, but really check it, right? Assuming that it's informal. And they reach consensus that it's fine, and everyone else believes them, right? But now we have this device formal verification. What it gives us, basically, we press a button and have a, I don't know, a lamp saying it's type checked. But what is type checked? What is going on there? And we don't know. So I don't think it's really gives, how say, I don't think it's really democratized, the process in the sense that, say, ordinarily people, except not only professional mathematicians, but a tiny portion of professional mathematicians who are specialists in the given field, who can really check that, right? Now we have this in code that everybody may use, but what everybody does, everybody can just press a button. And also talking about this collective project, actually one of going on project is that led by Kevin Buzard in Imperial College in London. And actually he just recently just started, he get the funding for formalizing Andrew Wild's proof of Fermat's theorem, which is huge and kind of horizon. And formalize does not mean you go, down to axioms. It means you go down to, say, results of 1980s or something, right? That you formalize the rest, and that. But what he does is he actually gives some postdoc students, okay, you formalize this part, you formalize that part. Then somehow he puts these things together, and finally it becomes a lot of code, which is not really transparent, right? We don't really know that student did exactly, except that after all, one presses button, the whole proof type checks, and what we see in the beginning, right, and in the end, it's kind of easily interpretable, right? Because, okay, the statement of Fermat series is pretty easy, right? That even, say, school children can understand that. So we may say, okay, we don't care what's going on in between. We just, make sure that theorem follows according to lean standard of following, right, from our hypothesis. And ultimately, hypothesis could be axioms, even if it's not in the reach. Right. And but then, of course, we may ask question whether this kind of code really represent knowledge, right? If people really don't understand what is it, right? And actually, there are a lot of efforts and special projects how say to parse this kind of code to separate it as kind of humanly understandable blocks on things like that. There is also this technology of self-explanatory machine learning, right? Then the machine, the neural network is asked not only make some decision to tell this is a cat, this is a dog, but also explain why, right? To make, if you like, a proof that justifies this or that decision. So, right, but there is also interesting argument against this approach. And there was a guy there, I forgot his name, who actually was a key person in developing this AlphaGo, this algorithm which actually won the Go champion in the world, right? And unlike chess champion, now because Deep Blue he won on Kasparov, then it was not just machine learning on existing, say, records of human games, but what they called reinforced learning, right? So roughly speaking, computer played against itself, and arguably that really allows computer to develop things that human mind would never guess, you know. And so that's the argument that no, we should not limit everything human, we should somehow go beyond human. But then of course, even if we go beyond human in that sense, if we still want to be tool, then after all we probably need to humanize. No, anyway, that's something we need to discuss. This is a Timothy Gowers, one of, again, a key working mathematician. As he put it, the proof should not be, after all, look like a rabbit from the head. You know, the proof should be somehow motivated or reasoned or grounded, if you like, right? Not just formal derivation in some system, right? For citizen mathematics, no, again, as things are now, we should really ask what kind of society it maps. And as I already made this reference to Stalin's and to industrialization, we should make special efforts to avoid that kind of thing. So by itself, it does not make things somehow democratic and does not promote enlightenment in any form or whatever. Right. Now, for preservation, okay, I have a little time probably. It was a talk by Ferner. He asked, can mathematics be hacked? Right. So if we really, mathematics is preserved in this form of code, it's very vulnerable to many things, right? To just physical destroy, because nobody actually, that is something that my colleagues in Archive Poincaré seriously work. I also was involved in a project like that just what would happen with all our computer stuff in, say, 100 years. There is no technological response today. And that's a kind of irresponsible, I would say, if you cannot guarantee anything in 100 years, just saying, okay, will be atomic war or anything. That's kind of not very responsible, I think. And books, at least we may guarantee for like 5 centuries, I think at least it's okay. So we did not outperform books in that sense still. Okay, but then it's already concluded by very briefly. I still would want to bring this larger historical and philosophical perspective, which I do think is useful, right? Because of course, we can find in the past all the answers to new challenges, obviously, but we may find a lot, right? This is a kind of cold experience, and now we're talking about serious collective historical experience, because many things discussed now, they have some, at least, analogs in the past. By the way, this issue, among other things, this issue of what actually Brentano called blind inference, right? That's not something new, this idea that you may just infer certain things without actually thinking, right? By kind of manipulating symbols. And that was provocative letter of Leibniz when he said, okay, he probably was partly a joke, but he wrote in a letter that, say, moral problems, political problems, we may probably just solve by computing. And he, of course, was motivated by Descartes' analytic geometry, right, which again translate geometrical problem into some algebraic problem, right? And algebraic problem is solved just by algorithm, just manipulating symbols without any meaning, if you like, right? And then it's interpreted back in geometry, and it turns out to be effective. What to do about that? And I think, okay, I have now no time to talk about that, but I don't think that how say the collective decision was all in favor of these formal methods, Of course, they were important, but there were also some excesses in 19th century, specifically in Germany. We have this kind of back move into intuitive synthetic geometry, like geometry der Lage, etc., which were also very productive, right? Which did not cancel, of course, analytic methods, but kind of added. So I think if we bring all this historical knowledge and historical understanding to our present thinking, that's, of course, absolutely relevant. Yes, that's just Doug Pravitz that says, a valid argument must preserve truth, right? I like it. But preservance of truth is not sufficient condition for validity. It's necessary, but not sufficient. Nobody would consider piano axiom followed by Fermat theorem as a proof, even if indeed follows, right? As every examiner stresses, not enough that the step of proof happened to follow, but it must be seen. So it's kind of human factor, but it's absolutely fundamental to what we call a proof, right? With this Lin, it's not exactly that. It's not like we have axioms and then theorem and then this gap. We have a lot of small steps, but it's not sufficient for us to understand small, even if we may control them, even I don't think it's completely realistic. But even if we may have argument that each small step is fine, it's still not sufficient for understanding. We obviously need kind of bigger picture of that. And right. No, okay. Yeah, if we're talking now about foundation in kind of standard 20th century sense, like Hilbert, okay, I will not read you, you can read it. In a sense, all these ideas are there, right? We want to formalize, we want to check, we want to give mathematical answers to questions we earlier were philosophical, but actually it's a matter of fact, of historical fact, what happened, that Hilbert himself was more interested in what he himself called meta-mathematics. Actually, he uses in his book of 38, I think 1938, with Bernay's second volume of Grundlagen der Mathematik. He uses interchangeably meta-mathematics and proof theory, device theory, right? And indeed, it's actually gives a possibility to prove a lot of nice things about these formal systems. And that actually what happens in the, if you think like in set theory, say continuum hypothesis, independence of continuum hypothesis, all that is a mathematical theorem about certain formal system, right? But it does not give you formal system which is workable as a language. You see, it's completely different thing. Sometimes I think they are confused, right? And that's interesting that actually when, yeah, that's my further slide. That's when people try to do this in 60s, right, to do something really practical about this idea of formal foundation, they actually did not use what was classical, right? Because classically were untyped system, like classical first order logic, like Zermelo-Fraenkel axiom theory, they immediately seen that they needed typing. If you like, type theory was a little bit around, invented by, say, Russell for theoretical reasons, but here the need of typing was kind of practical. They just seen that without typing they cannot do anything. Right. That's, of course, all need more studies. Right. And actually what happens that this special knowledge of foundation alienated so much mathematician from foundations of mathematics and from philosophy also. And that still exists today, very much so. In for example, in that community, that people say, no, I don't want to do anything with foundational mathematics, philosophy, we just do your stuff in the philosophy institute or something. We don't want that. Yeah, and but that I think, but there are some also different reactions back by Bill Lovier, basically, and his colleague Rosenberg. So he criticized this notion of foundation, but his attitude was not to leave them, but just to change them. He says, Foundation explained the essential general characteristic and gradients and operation of a science, as well as origin general laws of development. The purpose of making them explicit is to provide a guide to the learning, use, and future development of science. This is what, according to Bill Levere, the true foundation should serve for. A pure foundation that refers to standard foundation that forgets this process and pursues detached speculative foundation is clearly a non-foundation, right? So there was also this, which I do believe should be taken seriously. So we should not be happy, right? There is a. I only mention. I promise Irina not to talk about that, but important chapter of this story was a so-called Univalent foundation of mathematics, invented by our compatriot, a friend. Unfortunately, he died rather young age, before his 60s in 2017. He invented what he called univalent foundations. That is fascinating thing, but I can only mention it now. But one feature of that was that they actually were designed for computer implementation, and even some journalists, they completely confuse it. You see, they say mathematics is being rebuilt on top of new foundations, and redefined computers would give new foundation, which was not true, of course. The new foundation was given by Vladimir Genius, right? Vladimir was a field medalist of 2002, I think, and he was later professor mathematics in Princeton Institute of Advanced Studies before his premature death in 2017. Right, but that's interesting. I only mentioned this story about this univalent foundation. It's also known under the name of homotopy type theory because it really bridges homotopy theory, which is actually intuitive geometrical theory, and type theory. And so early versions of Lean, they tried to use it, right? But then they just didn't want, because that really is a program of new foundations, right? It's a program of doing new kind of mathematics, of completely rethinking the existing mathematics. And so this computer implementation just comes up from that, right? And just people didn't want, they say, okay, we want something. At least as Kevin Buzzard recently argued, it just proved ineffective. We want something, we want formalize more theorems, and certainly, but there was also interesting talk by Emily Real, who actually he showed this higher category theory. This is again a part of mathematics recently developed, tightly related to this homotopy type theory, that you actually cannot do that in Lean. He had the project of doing with that Lean, but he said it does work. And of course, she can do that in Coq, interpreting Coq with homotopy type theory, but she could not do that in Lean. And this is interesting. There are many aspects, but there is also important epistemic aspects behind this choice, yes or no, for homotopy type theory, because there is this issue of proof relevance, for example, right? Roughly, it's about whether we should remember all proofs or just say, okay, if we prove this lemma, we can use it without proof, kind of forgetting it, which I think it's important, right? But believing all or remembering all proofs, we can do much more mathematics. So ideally, we would somehow have a language we would allow to do both, which I think Coq allows in some sense. But anyway, there are really deep, important issue behind, and I actually kind of regret this is all decided a lot of things by kind of commercial logic, which I don't really believe it's quite appropriate. So my conclusions, okay, will be 4 conclusions. So automata theory improving is a novel artificial intelligence technology. I don't think it can be ignored, right? It's rather a question. It will be used in maths everywhere as a ChatGPT. It's question is in which form and how, right? I don't think it's a good idea to resist. I think it's important to engage and somehow define, because it may be harmful, yes, but I think it's really responsibility of mathematical community, computer science, maybe also some philosophers actually, to forge this kind of ATP, automatic theoretic proving, that somehow we need, right, in a way that enhances public social epistemic interest and common goods internationally rather than nationally. Okay, I have very, very simple enlightenment ideas in mind, nothing very, very, how to say, original in that sense. Yes, and extensively measured efficiency that people are, at least part of people are kind of obsessed. I don't think it's appropriate KPI for evaluating this ATP-related strategies and decisions, because it is kind of techno-optimism, which at the moment probably you write more code. You may say, okay, I formalized proof of Fermat's theorem, but I think we should think a little bit more strategically, right? It's what kind of system we are creating, what kind of system we are actually offering to billions of users, and what kind of mathematics they learn. Because of course, learning mathematics is a question of really billions and billions of people, of kids, no, except really unfortunate part of the world like Gaza now, for example, right? We kids learn maths, right? And so we should really be serious to think how they learn, and that kind of technology will come, but question is in which form, how, right? That's of course very, very important. And right, and of course, all this development, as I say, did not come out of the blue. There is obvious roots in history of ideas, history of technologies is not something absolutely new, and that's why it's really important to have this, how to say, historical and philosophical expertise, just to think about this in a context, which is not sufficient, as I say. We also need things for future, but we should somehow evaluate possible future without actual past. And right, and finally, that may look like kind of philosophical questions about you know, serious technology, but that's kind of question, they really influence decisions, because there are decisions which sometimes very costly in terms of like billions and billions of whatever stable currency, euro, right, are made. And again, it's important that such decisions are made kind of reasonably, right, with some knowledge, and not just some feeling or something, right? And finally, I think if philosophy historians can do something about that, and I think they can, the only way to somehow to engage, at least this community is kind of, at least at that moment, a part of it may not like philosophers, but if they see you kind of understand basic things, they accept you. It's not very aggressive in that sense so far. So I think it's important for, say, philosophers and, say, for mass education, not just to control, say, oh, there's something bad, it's crazy scientists, we should, stop them. No, no, no. It's just engage and think how to make things better in in many senses. Yes, I think, yes. Thank you for listening.
Curious about your initial skepticism concerning automated theorem proving. And I have this kind of comment. So you created this opposition between proof verification and theorem proving. And it should reflect the idea that on the one hand, we have video checking whether it can prove it correct. And on on the other hand, we are looking for a proof from scratch. So we're not very giving any standard system proof, right? However, in the second area, there's a distinction between two things in my view. So one thing is whether we want to generate a new theorem, namely a new statement within a certain domain of reasoning, and we want to build a proof to support that statement, for instance. And another thing is whether we give a statement to the system as an input to be checked, and then the system itself generates a proof if it is possible, or it doesn't, if it is not possible, or if it has some kind of computational limitations. And my usual understanding of automated theorem proving is in accordance with the second explanation, namely the idea that it is a broader activity which encompasses also the fact that we give a statement to a certain theorem prover, and the theorem prover generates a proof. And this clearly happens to be the case with many tools that I described already with logic theories, one of the first tools developed during the Dartmouth conference. You take an axiomatic theory, an active theory, and you ask a question like, is this formula a theorem of the system? Then the tool is properly programmed, is able to generate a proof to tell you this is actually the theorem. So in this broader sense, I would say that we already have, and we have had for several decades, tools that are able to provide us with automated theorem proving. But I'm curious to see your opinion on this in a more detailed way, because it seems to me that you have you tend to adhere to the other perspective, right? The idea that automated theorem proving means generating new theorems entirely.
Okay, thank you. Maybe I repeat for YouTube. So the question was, why was that my original skepticism about proof search, right? Why I wanted to delimit the role of computer to proof verification. So my reason was maybe not very well informed, maybe historical, because actually what happened in history that in the beginnings, in the 60s, and everyone would think, at least in these two functions, even it looks like the Soviet school, Glushkov, right? They put more emphasis on proof search than, even if he described this proof assistance, so somehow he had in mind that kind of idea that you just described. I put theorem and say is a statement whether it's a theorem or not a theorem. But finally, what worked is rather more modest system, right? And when it's a mathematician who actually makes the proof, but mathematician may actually type check, so verify formally more or less each step until the whole thing is built, or if it's a disproof or certain theorem, say a counterexample is built. So right. So, no, again, at my understanding, it's still not there that we put some theorem and give axioms of, I don't know, Zermelis Franklin asking if it's theorem or not a theorem. I think it still works, say, rather limitedly. No, say there are certain things I know, or in group theory, right? And right, so that's history. But maybe you're right. Of course, this proof search is just as important as proof verification. But actually, another point, I think, kind of philosophical, epistemic, right? It's how we think actually about, say, theorems, right? If we really believe that all epistemic value is in statement, right? It's kind of truth, and our knowledge is a collection of, say, justified true beliefs or something, right? It's all propositional knowledge. Then we may, say, we don't really care how this justification works. No, or we may say kind of this not direct justifications. If we believe that lean is justified as a whole, then we might not be interested to know how this particular program in lean works. But I think it's a kind of wrong way of on mathematics, because at least also historically, what is important in mathematics is not just theorems, right? It's roughly speaking constructions, everything, right? And particularly if you think about mathematics in the context of, say, its application in engineering, natural science, right? Of course, mathematical theorems play a role, but also kind of the whole mathematical reasoning when, say, we think, no, say, if you take classics like Newton, right? He just found a way to model mathematically, say, mechanical world, so to speak, right? And so what is important, it's not only statements, something true and false, right? But this something that's between statements roughly, which can be proved, but maybe as independent, say, construction. Roughly, if you want this older terminology, theorems and problems are important. And that's also a reason really take care about, right. Yes, but maybe you're right that, and finally I corrected, I improved my understanding. Yes.
Thank you. Thank you for that. So over the whole talk, I was wondering about one thing, and you just keep talking on the table with the last sentence of the last slide. We are not in a position to do mathematical science. I've got a question which, at the end of the response to myself, or started about something studying. So, me as a philosopher, we're interested in, what's the nature of mathematics, what's the epistemic emphasis of mathematics, about mathematical things. So we have, mathematical atomists who say, look, it's out there. What we do is actually we discover mathematics. We have deflationists who says, look, there are no mathematical fields, there are just useful devices. There are constructives and all the plethora of views. So you're giving me a view of mathematician of mathematics.
Of what?
Of kind of how to automatize. Can you localize me? So where I am when I'm doing this, am I discovering truth or am I constructing truth? Am I just describing the truth?
Yeah.
Can you just help me?
Yeah, it's a good question. So, yeah, I repeat shortly. The question was, is my understanding, your question, if I summarize correctly, was whether these formal approaches somehow guide or at least, right, or probably prescribe certain philosophical view about, say, mathematical objects, about mathematical knowledge, whether or not there are mathematical truths and so on. So I think that generally rather not. I think that it may be, of course, that this development somehow, how say, motivates certain philosophies of mathematics more than certain others, but by and large, I think they are compatible with different view, be it some Platonic or probably in a sense they emphasize a constructive approach, right? Because we kind of see constructive aspects, I mean, computable aspects of mathematics. But it is not necessarily constructive mathematics in the standard sense that we don't want excluded middle. That by the way, also interesting, because if we talk about it just technically, as sometimes people prefer actually, right? They say there is some mathematics and we formalize and get a code and but if you think what's really going on, it's a good question whether or not, say, excluded middle somehow is supported, how it's interpreted, because computationally it may be implemented, but kind of not very naturally, say, right? This Coke, etc. They do not have a excluded middle in their construction, right? It should be kind of added. And there are many issues like that, but I don't think it's really how say rules out certain philosophies and promotes some others. No. Yes.
Thank you. So this will be a very broad question from the point of someone who doesn't really know all the nitty-gritty, so like details of ATP, but is so like interested from some sort of like sociological point of view. But I hope it's fine because it seems to me that your talk was also very much related to like history and sociology. I mean, of this device. So you know, in philosophy, I have been thinking a lot about how, let's say, like future advances of LLM will somehow like change the practices of publishing in our discipline. And it seems to me, you know, very, I would say naively maybe, there's something similar, I mean, can be so like explored or somehow like anticipated when it comes to like mathematics. So basically my question is, do you think that as, I mean, ATP will become more and more like advanced in future, it will somehow completely change the standards of like publishing in mathematics? So, you know, when I think about, you know, from the forward-looking point of view, like how it might change, like one possibility is that like publishing will collapse because there will always be like salient possibility that someone relied heavily upon like ATP when actually somehow validating the correctness of the theorem that they try to prove. And we will no longer be able to distinguish between like real mathematical achievement and just something like cheating. Another option is that it will somehow like change the standards or will be considered to be like true mathematical achievement, that it will be something which will be relating more like genuinely tracks mathematical truth. Or maybe, you know, it will never become so advanced that, I mean, it will anyhow change the system. So I just don't know. I can think of several scenarios, but I'm interested in what's your take on it? Like, what do you predict as expert in this field? Thank you.
Yeah. No, of course, of course, I don't know either, because again, I think it's still open to many scenarios, right? It's not a single. There is no like predefined scenario. So we may one scenario, I think, is actually that mathematics will go after what already happened in at least some areas of physics, where individual work is a less how say important, and the important achievement made by a big collectives of people. I remember one was this field Higgs boson papers, not even official papers, but on archive, meaning without referee. And there were two collaborations, Atlas and I forgot the name of the other. It was about 10 years ago, I think maybe 15 already. And actually I think there was agreement between them because they actually put at the same second, apparently again avoid to issues of priority. And in one was 3,000 of authors and the other 5,000 of authors. And so they put all theorems. I think it's kind of nice. It's a little bit like with films, then you have a lot of people. But Nobel Prize went to Higgs, who actually did not himself experimental work, right? He thinks theoretically earlier. And maybe, I can't quite remember, was shared. Again, maybe some kind of boss in this large group of people. So it looks like it's on the one hand, you may say it's kind of democratic, but on the other hand, it's kind of feudalic because it still needs a kind of boss who coordinates everything and a lot of people. So there is actually it quite promotes inequality, I think, between different say play. This is one scenario, all right, but whether there's a issue of authorship, right? It's something made with a machine, but someone claim I made it myself. Yeah, that I don't know. No, at least now it's much more acute, this problem in, say, humanities, because, as I say, it's much better. It writes all kinds of essay, blah, 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 rather than mathematics. So far, there are systems which make kind of Olympiad level mathematics, but they are special. They are not in public access. And this is not pure machine learning because you need necessarily this contour of verification, which is completely different technology, right? So you may use something like LLM for, search. And here again, you should have a base to learn on. And so far the base is growing, but it's not comparable with natural language base, right? It's much, much smaller. So maybe in the future, right, we would have something like that. Which problem, sorry?
They tracing stuff with the and based on some kind of a value, theoretical value, technical value, they can in resources they lean on, they can really go deep. There's new programs which do not really work, but they look like it, like like in general, the label for this is I think hallucination, but
Yeah.
how big of a problem is it in ATP?
Yeah. So if I understood you correctly, you're saying that verification is generally important for like LLM, right? We should verify what it does.
Yeah.
Right, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. In I actually collaborate. I mean, not myself, but I collaborated with say experts, and they showed me how you may kind of trick the system, which works in 90%, gives you right, but if you know how to trick it, it just goes wrong answers, and certainly you cannot use this kind of technology in any responsible transport like aviations or nuclear plants. It's out of question. Yes, and so that problem, of course, is well understood. And no, look, here, yeah, I'm not special, but my understanding is that mathematics stuff, right? Exactly, it may have important applications beyond, say, mathematics, science in a real industrial application, basically to make how say everything we can get with LLMs kind of verifiable automatically. Yes. Yeah. And I know that there is a lot of startups working on that. Even like my earliest former students work in such startups, and I think it's coming. But that's rather usual that mathematics serves as kind of how say experimenting field for tasting new ideas, if you like, for generating tasting new ideas. So yes, I'm pretty sure what we develop in mathematics would be applied elsewhere. Yes.
So when we consider applications that's supposed to reach other domains of reasoning, other aspects of society, and maybe there's also new problem that arises, namely that we no longer take it sufficient that experts in mathematics and logic are able to check what is going on. Perhaps we need other categories of people access
Surely.
the inferential steps that about the device which is
Absolutely.
and this is, in my view, for instance, one of the reasons why this kind of approach is still struggling a lot in areas such as legal reasoning, because the community has this kind of default skepticism towards trusting entirely a different community, basically the community of mathematicians or logicians, when it comes to assessing whether the output of a device is correct or not. And since these tools are somehow designed around certain ways of performing reasoning, like natural deduction or nowadays sequence calculus, stuff like that, which do not necessarily correspond to the way in which we ordinarily perform reasoning. Perhaps we might also have to think about changing found it into something that is closer to real life deductive reasoning or real life reasoning. So to design these tools in a way that more closely resembles real life deductive reasoning.
Yeah, but by the way, you mentioned that's probably I would come back to your question about possible scenario of interaction, and that was a remark of one of participants of this conference, Newton Institute. I don't remember whom, and I think it's very correctly that actually this authorship, right, the human person, is important, not maybe for some, how say, reasons for like copyright or authorship, right? But for kind of a legal reason that someone should take responsibility, right? That what machine, yeah, you know, you theoretically you can say that there is some machine, it does something, right? And somehow machine is created by many people. Nobody is really responsible what it is doing, and it does something, and then somehow nobody responsible or collect. But I think at least was the argument, which I think is convincing, right? That it's important just to have responsibility. That if I want to say this is a theorem, this is true, right? Someone should take that responsibility. This is kind of ethical thing, right? Someone, a meaning a human, should say, I claim this is true. And then you may have machine, whatever, for your justification and for persuading other people. And the same, of course, in the case of legal applications, that is even more, right? The judge should really take on him or her this responsibility to judge that way, not other. And they made whatever machines as a tools, but then they remain tools. And of course, and there were many actually attempts, right, to somehow, how say, to make it human consumable. And even these works by people, this Gore people, right, who argue that it could be something that a human would never think of, right? Okay, that's interesting, but at the end of the day, I think a human must check it too, and become to think about things. Use this, right? At least this is my opinion about this. And there are probably other people who are more more to something post-human.
I have two questions. The first one about could you update me about the foundations of mathematics discussion? What is the best candidate for foundations now? Traditionally, historically, it was set theory, type theory, category theory. And is it affected somehow by?
I don't know. I have impression. It's only my impression that actually all that discussion somehow became, I would say, unpopular, and this discussion that we still have, right? It's actually struggles to define what foundation means, because foundation may mean many things. And I think Bill Levier was quite right that say what people somehow try to establish as a consensus, right? What is a set theory foundation? They actually had this foundation in a rather specific sense of foundations, right? Which is not generally shared and certainly doesn't cover certain needs, right? If we think about foundation as something like Bill Levier specified as a kind of guide for development and kind of, yeah, it simply does not work in that way, this set theoretic foundation, even if it may be useful for some purposes. It's kind of nice theoretical constructs, which is very thoroughly studied more than anything else, right? And actually, no, then there was this idea of category theory as foundation. Actually, what Volodya Voevodsky developed, this Univalent foundation, is related to this idea of making language of categories into foundation. at least was a technical point, certain point, he believed that he would restrict to groupoids and that would give what is the standard version of Univalent foundation. Even some other people still struggling with this so-called directed type theory, which would introduce full category theory instead of groupoids and fundamental objects. But Volodya also actually at some point he said, okay, let's not talk about foundation, let's me talk about some framework. So he was, of course, working mathematician first of all, right? So yeah, I do believe that in some broader practical, if you like, historical sense, foundation is a kind of good idea. It's also a natural point of contact between, say, philosophy and science, mathematics is something very traditional, right? That philosophy, it does not mean, of course, that philosophy somehow decides foundation for mathematicians. No, but it's a point of interaction, point of contact, and no. So to answer you briefly, I believe this is my belief that we should really redefine what foundation is and what it serves for, right? First of all, and in that context, continue to talk about foundations in a broader sense, not only in that rather peculiar sense that it took into this development concerning set theory and the kind of philosophy which tried to draw on that development.
Types, do you think types are absolutely necessary? Is it actually possible to do these types automated proving, for example? Do you know something?
No, again, if I relate this question of type theory to your previous question, right? It looks like if we want to think about foundations, as I say, more practical, even I don't want to emphasize to this distinction with theoretical foundation and practical. I think it's all the same foundations. Like I'm not particularly fan of this philosophy of mathematical practice. I think it's all philosophy of mathematics. But I think it's the right idea, right, to make something workable, and then yes, we want somehow to account formally for what we do in mathematics. If this is a part of what we want to call foundations, and I think it should be, then at least in some form type theory is right, is just indispensable. At least we need to, you know, there was looking from things anachronistically. We may say that actually in classical untyped system, right, there was a kind of typing which was implicit. For example, people would say this is a proposition, right? This is a whatever logical symbols. This is not logical symbols, right? And this is already, and that's somehow brought into calculus just from outside. It is not formalized itself, right? Say, you simply say this is my propositional variable, right? And this is my non-logical symbol or something, right? And but in a type system, all of that is makes part of mathematical construction, and so if you like, typing is kind of deeper formalization. So we formalize things deeper, we get typing. No, it's a little bit Platonic kind of view, but yeah, I would say so. In that sense, yes, we do need. We do need typing and foundations of mathematics.
Talk Peter about this. So now I'm thinking about foundations. So
Foundations.
yeah. So is the project to have the fundamental stuff and build on something more, more complicated? So this kind of foundations project. Now we can have kind of coherence with when there is no foundation, no fundamentals, but truth is defined by means of coherence rather than correspondence. Is that kind of intention, or is the problem? I'm staying silent about this. This is your metaphysical crap. I don't care about this, or is it so? Because it seems like you mentioned types are indispensable. That's a serious claim.
This is what?
That's a serious claim. So
Yeah.
claim something.
Yeah.
Dispensability means I need them. I need like.
No, I need them if I want to kind of save mathematics as it is practiced, right? But of course, in foundation, you make kind of revolutionary move. You say, and that's essential and can be justified, right? I don't want things as they are. I want things different and better. Yeah, which of course was a case of set theory, right? And that's also important aspect, of course, was the thing. But I think we should, some kind of balance, right? So if it's really good, but of course, all this architectural metaphor, like foundation building, it doesn't work. There is this Otto Neurath proposed, the boat, or probably it's something. I think so. I'm trying to understand foundations as a kind of historically also. I'm not thinking about foundation something internal. And I think this history of foundations is also rather peculiar but important part of history of mathematics, right? And basically it's about how say, usually it happens that way that say some new general principles, some people would say language, right, is invented, which on the one hand helps to solve certain open problems and allows to save your background. That's very important. It's important, of course, that, say, set theory allows to rewrite all Pythagorean theorem in new setting, right? So and that's, of course, interesting and I think understudied, how that translation really works, right? What is the claim that it is basically the same theorem, just written in different language? If you look inside, it's completely different, right? And so how exactly that happens, that you translate from one language to another language. I think an important feature that it doesn't work in both directions. It works from the past to the future, but not from future to the past. So you may translate all of Euclid in a language of set theory, but you cannot translate all Bourbaki into language of Euclid, obviously. Right? And so it's important part of what we may call a progress of mathematics. And then, of course, the question whether we should have one kind of fixed, right, foundation, at least for particular moment of history for everyone, or there may be some competing foundation. No, I'm rather for competing. I don't know. That's, of course, complicated question. But it would, yeah, and by the way, if we think about this in this framework of automated theorem proving, that also becomes whether or not, for example, this is a good idea to have just one to stick to lim, for example, right? Or we should have many competing. Because I think people too often just think, okay, let's just have one because it's more practical. And I think that's something really wrong about that, right? Because there should be many different attempts and they should compete in different ideas. It's a little bit like, using English in academic exchange. I do not believe that we need one language, particularly English. I'm talking now in English. Yes, in history of science, because the argument goes as such that we are not interested in linguistic, particularities. We are not talking about fine literature, right? So things we are talking about can be expressed in any language. And if any language, let's using, and I think it's completely flawed, the argument. It's wrong. And it's wrong, why? Because if you do that, you cannot really see what is kind of invariant with languages, right? And what is not. And to see that, you do need many languages and you do need translations. Because by translations, you may identify what is invariant. I think the same thing here. If you just stick to one project, we really can lose some very important, possibilities which probably will be rediscovered later. So in that sense, I'm completely pluralist. Yes. Yeah. Uh, Thank you, everybody on YouTube. So thank you for listening. Bye bye.